dropped, and it's showtime from downtown Winnipeg.
Forcing the blast, moves back, scores! Shifley wires it, scores!
What a stop by Hellebuck!
Kyle Connor, Jets go bang, bang, bang!
Welcome to Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets.
Episode 154 of the Ground Control podcast coming your way right now. And I know you clicked on this or saw it come up on your phone and you saw Jeff Marek of Sportsnet's going to be on here. So you're pumped about that. You're also pumped about the analysis you're going to get from Paul Edmonds and Jamie Thomas of 680 CJOB. But we have another special guest for you. A familiar voice on the podcast, Tyler Esquivel. Welcome back.
Hello. It's good to be back.
Where were you?
I was at my desk for most of it.
And I was rudely taken away from my work.
No, I was given the blessing to jump out of a meeting and join you guys, so thanks for having me.
Well, and there's a very specific reason. Obviously, we're going to start this thing off talking about Nino Niederreiter. That is the big news in Jets land at this point. But you were at the airport.
I was.
How was that for you when he got off the plane? Was it about 9:30 p.m. Central
Yeah,
Time?
he got in about 9:45, and so it was, it's Winnipeg, it's cold, but there's cold and then there's cold, and it was only about -9, -15 with the wind chill or so, which doesn't sound terrible, but then when you're shooting and you got bare hands on a metal camera, slowly as the minutes tick on by, you have less and less dexterity, and by the time you stepped off the plane, you'll notice there's a bit of a shake in the video. That's because my brain is trying to tell my hands to zoom in a little bit, but they just weren't listening. So luckily, by the time I edited the video, the hands were back to normal. But it was cool. It was really good. Great first impression from the guys. So happy to have them.
Gave you a nice little wave too. So obviously some
Oh,
camera
yeah.
awareness. I mean,
Yeah.
good on him.
There's a connection already.
Yeah.
Yes.
But obviously, you look at what he's going to be able to bring to the Winnipeg Jets lineup. Obviously, a spark. Anytime you get a new face into the room, that certainly does that. 5-time 20-goal scorer. Been in double digits in all but 2 of his 12 seasons. And by all accounts, really has a nose for the net. Paul, just curious, when you found out that this was going to be happening and then the announcement comes, just what was your initial reaction?
Well, you kind of unpack it, and then the more you unpack, the more you seem to like. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, boxes to check here. There's a lot of assets that Nino brings to the team. The ability to play both sides, 6'2" frame, a guy that's been a 6-time 20-goal scorer in the National Hockey League, a guy that's played almost 800 games. And then you start to say, okay, well, why is he here? Well, he's here for the stretch run and the postseason, presumably. And he has another full season of postseason games on his resume at 82 games. So there's a lot that I like about this trade and this acquisition, not to mention the fact that it's not a rental. It's a guy that's got another year left on his deal. So there's a lot of things that you can really like if you're the Jets fans and you were looking for Kevin Cheveldayoff to do something. He certainly has. And if you're the Jets themselves, you like the acquisition of this guy coming into your room.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'll get Jamie to talk about this one, but it really seemed, it can be a tough spot, I'd imagine, for a new player coming in. You come into, number one, a Canadian market, but also 2, a new team, a new set of media faces to stare at. And that's pretty much what Nino Niederreiter had to do after the 45-minute practice on Monday. He comes in, brand new people, and he's getting hit with all these questions. There's cameras everywhere. But Jamie, just your overall thoughts on kind of what he had to say and just the vibe in and around the room, which, clearly, obviously, the Winnipeg Jets, things aren't going the way that they would like in the last few games, but certainly, you get someone new, maybe that can change the vibe up a little bit.
Right. I think it does. And I think you just, they've been holding water here for a little bit, trying to get their game back intact. But I mean, I think any addition at this time that can help you in your top 6 is going to excite everybody in the dressing room. So I think he handled things pretty well. And it helps that he has a relationship with Nikolai Ehlers. They know each other pretty well. So that's going to make it a little bit easier. Brendan Dillon picked him up, today for practice. That's pretty much the best guy I can possibly think of to give you a ride to the arena for your first practice too. So I mean, he's got to be excited too. Nashville was on their way out in terms of being a playoff team this year. They look like they're going to be sellers at this point. So I think any player that knows is going to be going to a team that's going to be pushed for a playoff spot and possibly further than that, it would be excited. And the thing that stood out to me, and the one line that Rick Bowness said last night was, he's hard to play against and we need that right now.
There you go.
Enough said. So, I mean, that's what Nino Niederreiter is. And I like he's an extremely frustrating player to play against. I've seen enough games where the Jets go up against him. He's in your face a lot, and he goes to the net.
Yeah, and that's exactly where Rick Bowness has put him on that power play. And the ideal plan right now to start things off, as he would skate with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Nikolai Ehlers. So Pierre-Luc Dubois, game time decision for Tuesday, but we cross our fingers, knock on wood, do all of those things, that Pierre-Luc Dubois will be good to go. One more for you, Tyler, before we get into Jeff Marek. One of the big cool parts about what you do on a day-to-day basis here is a lot of behind-the-scenes work. So you would have been able to see a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff when Niederreiter arrived at the rink. What was that like, and what kind of insight can you give our listeners?
Well, first of all, Brendan, so you're right, Brendan Dillon picked him up, but I want to know why that was necessary. I mean, he's staying at a downtown hotel, well within walking distance. But yeah, so Brendan brought him in this morning. He kind of was, I believe they were the first two players in, toured him around a little bit. He was really impressed with the facilities and got to meet everybody. First people he met was the trainers, and then coaches, all the medical staff, and just kind of got a tour of things. And then the thing that I find fascinating is the equipment guys. If you're a hockey gear nerd, that's right up your alley. And we will have some content with them as well. But yeah, it's just like the minutia of things. Like he had certain leathers in his or materials in his palm of his gloves, and we had that material. So our head equipment manager, Jay, was sewing those later on in the day before practice. It's crazy that they were able to just make that stuff for him right away. So there's just those little things, little interactions, and just getting to know the guys, and it was great. It seems like going to be a great fit for the team, and looking forward to sharing a lot of that content with our listeners, viewers, and fans. Yeah, just like you mentioned, if you want to check out any of that stuff, obviously it's going to be on the social media channels. It'll be on the Winnipeg Jets website. It'll be absolutely everywhere. So make sure you check that out. Now, of course, we're getting close to trade deadline, and someone to talk to Jamie Thomas would be Jeff Marek, someone who obviously talks to Elliot Friedman a lot on their podcast, and obviously has a spot on 32 Thoughts on Hockey Night in Canada as well. Just what stood out from your 17-minute conversation, I believe it is.
Well, we tried not to talk about anything that could happen, or because lots of things will change over the next 24 hours and even further as this podcast goes to people listen to it. But he touched on Nino Niederreiter. I did ask him, can a deal or two reinvigorate a dressing room at this time of year if a team is struggling? And then on top of that, he's got a great story about Greg Rosinski and Doug McLean almost went at it after a trade deadline at 1 year. I'll let him tell that story.
Shop where the players shop. Jets Gear and TrueNorthShop.com are your authentic team stores. Make sure to stock up on all your favorite Winnipeg Jets and Manitoba Moose merchandise today. Visit one of the 5 Jets Gear locations or shop online at TrueNorthShop.com.
Hi, this is Neil Pionk, and you're listening to Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets.
Jeff, before we get to the heart of the matter, of course, about the trade deadline and everything going on, I just got to ask, how popular is your cell phone at this time of year to the members of your family?
Not very. I mean, it's always on. Like, I've got the most like people like Elliot and me, like we have the most understanding spouses in the world. And bless them, they understand that this is the gig. This is going to be the gig until, at some point in July. But the key to making it all work is when we're down, we're really down. Like, phones go away, leave it, no checking Twitter nonstop. But they my wife and Elliot's wife, they know what they signed up for here. They didn't sign up for good looks. They signed up for the two guys that work hard.
Now, is the term "you're not present" brought up often at this time of year?
It's been mentioned. There's been the pet one with my wife is always, did you listen to a thing that I just said? Have you been listening at all? Repeat back one thing that I just said.
Meatball.
And I've been guilty of feathers before. Yeah, like, oh, I'm sorry, hon, you got me. Yeah, my bad.
Okay, well, listen, as we record this on a Sunday night after the Jets fell 4-0 to the New York Islanders, a lot of things could change by the time this goes out to everybody. But let's touch on Nino Niederreiter coming to the Winnipeg Jets, a big body winger. How do you believe he helps Winnipeg going forward?
This is a home run for Kevin Cheveldayoff. Like it really is. Like even if it were our rental, it would be a home run for Kevin Cheveldayoff. But there's another year attached. You know, in the podcast that Elliot and I tried to record this morning, but then we're going to have to redo it because everything has changed today. One of the points that we were making is Kevin Cheveldayoff may have the hardest job of any general manager in the NHL because the pool that he's able to draw from is smaller than any other team in the NHL. And for Cheveldayoff to pull off something like this with this type of player and only give up a second-round pick, I mean, this is that kind of home run where the outfielder doesn't even look over his shoulder, just sort of puts his head down because he knows the ball is leaving the yard. Look, play driver, big body, hard to play against. He's kind of like, when you look at Nino Niederreiter, like I've always looked at him and said, he's kind of your like new age power forward, isn't he? Like he's not like that, like Rick Tocchet, Cam Neely kind of power forward. But when you look at what goes into a power forward now in the NHL, Niederreiter's kind of that. Like I give full praise to the Jets on this one and Kevin Cheveldayoff. This one's a really nice bit of business by Chevy here.
This is a very broad question, but what else do you see them doing before Friday?
Great one. I always hate answering this one because no matter what I say, it could change in 2 seconds.
It's probably changing right now.
It probably is, or at least the conversations are being had. I'll tell you who I still wonder about. I still wonder about James Van Riemsdyk with the Winnipeg Jets. There's a few teams that are after him right now. Like we think of Vegas. I still don't think that they're done. Minnesota. I mentioned them on Saturday night on Hockey Night. I got a note from someone saying, they're probably not as hot on James Van Riemsdyk as other teams, but certainly there. I know that Dallas made a move today, bringing in Donoff, but they're one of the teams that's in that mix for James Van Riemsdyk. But Winnipeg has been there, and I wonder if Winnipeg is still in that mix for JVR.
When a team is struggling at the deadline like the Jets are, let's be honest here. Can a move or two reinvigorate a dressing room and going down the path? Yeah. The Dallas Stars in a similar situation as well. They've hit a little bit of a speed wobble. I know they had the big win, but going in before the most recent win, I mean it wasn't looking good, and that's one of the teams that if you ask anybody at any level of the organization, Jamie, they'll tell you the same thing. We can probably win the cup here. The Western Conference is kind of more wide open than the East. I mean, the East is loading up completely. The West is still very much jump ball, and Dallas still considers themselves, and I think rightly so, Jamie, as one of those teams who we could see. I mean, you can never sort of say we expect them to win the Stanley Cup, but at least you can say, like, we could expect to see them in the Stanley Cup and compete for the Stanley Cup and make it to the Stanley Cup final. I think they have all the ingredients it takes to make it to the Stanley Cup final, whether it's net mining, whether it's defense, whether it's players up front. So they're looking for a spark. I still don't think that Jim Nill is done. I still think that they're looking for players that are harder to play against. They were in on Tyler Bertuzzi until the Detroit Red Wings got within 1 point of the playoffs and Steve Yzerman stopped all conversations. I think they're in on Hathaway. I'm curious to see about Tanner Jeannot now that we have the news out of Nashville with Trotz, et cetera, and David Poile stepping down. We'll see what happens with Tanner Jeannot. I know they want to re-sign him, but I don't know where they're at with money. I think the first offer wasn't exactly to that player or his representation's liking. But teams know it. Like when you're that close and you're going through a little bit of a speed wobble, bringing in a new player as a shot in the arm or send in some reinforcements can absolutely help a team that has some deep playoff aspirations. And I think you throw the Winnipeg Jets into that conversation. And moreover, like if I'm Kevin Cheveldayoff, I'm looking at when my contracts are expiring and I'm looking at the kind of seasons that certain players are having, perhaps most notably Connor Hellebuck and a player like Josh Morrissey. And don't you have to kind of say to yourself, I owe it to this team and I owe it to this market that we need to go for it this year?
Because who knows what's going to happen when these contracts expire? Who knows? Like, they may resign, they may go else. We don't know. But if you're Cheveldayoff, you kind of owe it to this team in this market right now. They're close. They're real good. I know it's a little bit of a tailspin here, but I think you gotta try to supercharge that dressing room, and a trade can certainly do that.
Let's go back to James Van Riemsdyk for a second. Hasn't been the best of times for him since he came back to Philadelphia. At his best, what can he give should he come here?
He's so good around the net. The one thing about Van Riemsdyk,
exactly.
we've seen this with other players before. I always joke about a player like Tim Kerr, or a player like David Andreychuk, or even James Van Riemsdyk, and I say if you add up the distance traveled in all of their goals, like the distance that the puck actually travels to get over the line, like how short is that line? Even when you put them all together. Because he's just chip it in, deflect it in tight. Like, to me, James Van Riemsdyk, and actually Kyle Turris was really good at this too. James Van Riemsdyk is one of those players, he might be the best, or at least one of the best in the NHL at being in tight on a goalie and still have the ability to accurately go high. Like, when you're in tight and a goalie's on top of you, he can still fire it out. Like, that is such a unique skill. Like, anything around the net, you have someone like James Van Riemsdyk, like that can be the difference in a game, right? Like those goal mouth scrambles, a tip in front, a little chip in front, a little 1 foot goal that goes in.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we hear before all the time, Jamie? What's the hardest thing? Goals. That's why goal scorers get the big money. And James Van Riemsdyk, when he's on and at his best, around the net, this guy has magic hands, no doubt about it.
Well, Rick Bowness has been crying for those greasy goals, and James Van Riemsdyk could certainly provide that.
100%. That's James Van Riemsdyk grease. They're not going to be pretty. They're not going to have lipstick or a bow tie on them. They're not going to look nice. They're not going to be ready for prom. But you know what? You don't ask how. They just ask how many.
Okay, so Timo Meier came off the list too today.
Yeah.
He went to New Jersey. So is this a buyer or seller's market as we record this podcast? And I remind everybody, this is Sunday night around 6:00.
With defensemen, it's really interesting. I think some teams are feeling, well, certainly with a player like Jacob Chychrun, that the price is too high. Like there are a lot of teams, and we think of the Washington Capitals, that all of a sudden have a lot of defensemen to move. Right now, it might be a buyer's market when you look at defensemen, although I always come short of saying that because, what do we always hear on trade deadline time? Oh, looking for depth defense. But now all of a sudden, now that Washington is throwing in the towel, we wonder about, Nick Jensen. We wonder about Eric Gustafsson. We wonder about James Van Riemsdyk's brother, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, and where these defensemen may end up. And we wonder if, one of the replacements in Washington might just end up being Jacob Chychrun. And we wonder, what the St. Louis Blues are going to do with a couple of their blue liners. We wonder about Colton Parayko. We wonder about Torrey Krug, as, Doug Armstrong looks to redo this team right now. I know everybody wants it, but it just seems that right now the prices do seem a little bit high for blue liners, and that is certainly led by Jacob Chychrun.
And this is a crazy question, and it's a lot of fun. But what has more chaos going on right now, the East or the West?
Oh, it's the East. I mentioned on the podcast last week, man. It's the Eastern Conference octagon right now. Like it's a knife fight. Think about how everybody is completely loaded up here, and now Timo Meier goes from San Jose to New Jersey. Like maybe even just specifically the Metropolitan Division. You started off with Bo Horvat. Patrick Kane's on the horizon too, and like everyone's loading up there, and New Jersey's jumping in. And Jamie, as well as I do, that Carolina's going to do something. They've been in on a lot of these players. Don Waddell's not going to come back empty-handed here. Like it's tough. Like some really good players and really good teams are going home early, and there's going to be a lot of disappointed squads here that really, paid a lot to bring in headline players. But yeah, the chaos right now, and again, this could change, but the chaos right now, and then with the impending Patrick Kane deal, it's pretty chaotic in the East right now. I'm waiting for the West to do something huge. Someone's going to do something big here. Let's go.
Yeah, no kidding. I'll give you guys something to talk about on Friday for the most part.
Oh boy, you know what? I'm anticipating. I'm learning how to juggle, and I'm learning how to do sleight of hand and card tricks and spin plates, and maybe I should ask my kids how to break dance, or I got to do some type of entertaining on Friday because, man, it might be a very quiet. It's not the best way to hype trade deadline. I know as someone who's part of it, but maybe one of the more quiet ones that we've seen, Jamie. I'm not going to lie to you.
Goodness, it's at 10 a.m. Eastern this time, instead of years past where it was 8 a.m. Eastern. You guys were up in that at way too early.
Yeah.
Barbing stories at that time. So someone was listening to you guys. Someone.
Yeah, no, listen, I appreciate everybody that stuck with us back in the 8 a.m. days. Sanity has prevailed at least a little bit around our shop the last couple of years, and it's pushed to 10 a.m. I mean, really, like, nothing really happens until noon Eastern on this day. Like the morning session is just sort of, speculation and setting the table. And then really, a lot of the action actually kind of happens after trade deadline, like after 3 p.m. when the trades still, trickle in as the trade calls go through. So it's towards later in the afternoon, it gets more exciting. So thankfully some sanity has prevailed at our shop.
Like what Ron Burgundy said, it's science. Favorite trade deadline story from a player that you've heard over your many years of doing this?
Oh boy, I can remember talking to Colby Armstrong, and Colby was part of the Penguins Atlanta deal, the Marian Hossa, Pascal Dupuis deal, and I remember Colby just being so despondent. And I'm like, well, like, Colby, we kind of heard your name out there for a long time. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I'm like best buds with 87. I thought that I had Crosby insurance, and it wasn't gonna happen. It wasn't gonna happen to me. They had banners for me. I was palling around with Sid. I really thought I had Crosby insurance. Not so much.
You were just talking about the juggling you're going to have to do. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Like, what's your favorite kind of deadline day story of the stuff that's happening with the phone calls all coming in, producers yelling at you, floor directors directing people around? What's something good that's happened on trade deadline day? It's been pretty fun.
I remember there was one producer that I was getting a completely different message from the agent of this one player who almost sort of forced me to say something that I didn't want to say on television because although he believed that it was true, I was getting from the agent, don't go with it. That's not true. Thankfully, and I'm not going to say the player's name or the one producer in question that tried to strong arm me into saying something that this player's agent was telling me is not true. Thankfully, I was right in that situation and he was wrong, and I did get a sort of sheepish apology afterwards. But I'll tell you what, you want to hear a good one? Want to hear one of my favorite trade deadline stories? So as much as trade deadline is fun, the trade deadline after party for our network, for TSN as well, are kind of legendary as well. And so there was one year where a guy that I was doing a podcast with, Greg Wyshynski from then Yahoo, now ESPN. Yeah. So Greg would have Greg always delighted in having these gauges or meters for bad GM trades, and he'd sort of rank them based on, I think he referred to them as the Milbury scale. Bad trades, like how many.
I remember that.
Remember that? Okay, so I remember I can't remember specifically what it was, but he included Doug McLean in some of them as well, and sort of went over Doug's, sort of resume of bad deals. Like, listen, everybody has bad deals. Like no one gets out clean. Ask any general manager, right? Like, they're not all home runs. I get it. And so after trade deadline, I can't take my kids to hockey or something. I didn't go to the after party. And I remember I was at home making dinner with my wife, and I get a text from Greg, and it's like, can you call me? And I'm like, yeah, I'll call you later. And he says, no, you need to call me now. I think Doug McLean is going to kill me. And I'm like, what's I call him? He's like, I walked in, and Doug confronted me. He said, I essentially said, yes, I'm going to punch you out here at the bar tonight. Cooler heads prevailed, but I think honestly, as I look back on it now, it's probably every general manager's dream Just if you could get one freebie, that's a good question. Next time you talk to Kevin Cheveldayoff, Jamie, I want you to ask this question. If you could have one freebie on anyone in media, who would you use it on? If you could get one where the minute you throw the punch, everyone goes down to tie their skates and no one sees it, who would it be? Who would it be?
I think I could ask. I bet you I get a better answer from Craig Eisinger on that one.
Okay, there you go. Ask Singer what he thinks. Okay, that's a good one. I like that.
Jeff, thanks for the laughs, man. Thanks for the quick 15 minutes. Get back to your life,
dude,
and enjoy the next week. I appreciate it. And it's always great talking to you, my man.
You're the best, Jamie. It's great to hear your voice, pal. You be good.
Okay, take care, buddy.
Thanks, bud.
Hey Jets fans, I'm Sarah Orleski. Don't forget to join me after each and every home game for the Winnipeg Jets post-game show live presented by Budweiser, where you'll get exclusive interviews, in-room access, and more. Catch us on all Winnipeg Jets platforms, including Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and winnipegjets.com.
All right, big week coming up for the Winnipeg Jets. Certainly thank you to Jeff Marek taking some time out to chat with Jamie in a very busy week on the hockey calendar. But big week, like we mentioned. They got the Los Angeles Kings in Canada Life Center to take on the Winnipeg Jets on Tuesday, Black History Month game. Make sure you tune in or get to the building. That would be the better way. Ray Neufeld is going to be a big part of the game presentation that night, so make sure you're there. For that, winnipegjets.com/tickets is the place to go. Winnipeg's still in a playoff spot, even with the scoring slump that they've been going through. Like I said, LA on Tuesday, then a back-to-back with Edmonton this weekend. So certainly some big challenges for the Winnipeg Jets coming up here, Paul. And curious, when you look at the Los Angeles Kings, so often you think back to just a few years ago when you were beating those teams 2-1, 3-2, but now this LA Kings team has some speed, and they've got themselves in second spot in the Pacific.
Yeah, no surprise. I mean, they've got a good coach, Todd McLellan, who's been around and been able to kind of turn things around. You didn't know which way they were going to go because they still had Kopitar and they still had Doughty, and their goaltending was always never in question with Jonathan Quick. But you wondered if they were going to just have those guys nurse their way through their contracts in a rebuild. And it has not been that. It's been a quick retool here. It's taken them a couple of years, but they've got some good young players that you mentioned that have that speed. So for Winnipeg, the challenge now becomes it's 3 games in a row here. You go Los Angeles on Tuesday, and then you've got back-to-back Friday, Saturday against the Edmonton Oilers, against 3 playoff teams. And teams that you could very well maybe meet in the playoffs or have a first-round playoff bout with, or you could fight for maybe a wild card spot if you fall back, as Winnipeg has, against those Pacific Division teams that may fall out of their top 3 spots in their division. So a lot to kind of look at here. I look from this standpoint a little bit broader, though. I like the last 2 periods for the Winnipeg Jets, even though it was a 4-0 loss to the New York Islanders. And one thing that I've always remembered about previous coaches that were here, they will say, yes, when you're in a funk, it's pretty noticeable. You'll even notice when you're going to get into one because you're winning games you probably shouldn't. But then you'll start to notice even when you're losing games that you are competitive in when you're starting to come out of it. And I wonder if that's what we saw against the Islanders. You don't like the score. It's 4-0. It's not flattering. But you like the way they played the last 2 periods of that. So you wonder if there's steps for Winnipeg to come out of this funk, of which they never had this year before. So at some point, every team's going to go through a bit of a swoon. The Winnipeg Jets have found that in the last maybe 5 to 10 games. And you wonder if they're now just on the precipice of coming out of it.
Very nice vocabulary, as always. Final one for you, Jamie. Obviously, like we mentioned, you got the Edmonton Oilers back-to-back. We talked about the speed of the Los Angeles Kings. You really don't have to advertise the speed of the Edmonton Oilers. But curious if you think teams that play with that kind of pace will be the type of team that the Winnipeg Jets really like to go up against, especially as they try to, like Rick Bowness said on Monday, their speed from point A to B has been pretty good. It's just winning those battles when they get there. Are these the types of opponents the Winnipeg Jets need to face as they try to find that playoff game, playoff style of game, and get their offense back going at the same time?
Well, they seem to always bring that level up a little bit more to defend the way they want to. They have that recipe, as you say, when they play against the Edmonton Oilers. And I always find Neil Pionk gets to another level when he goes up against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. But these are 2 teams in the Kings and the Oilers that are having a tough time with their goaltending. So as well as these 2 teams can score, they're having a tough time keeping it out because the goaltending hasn't been consistent. Jonathan Quick is okay as of late, but Phoenix Copley is kind of taking the nets for the Kings, but he's even having it. He's like winless in his last 3 starts. And then we already know about it's been a nightmare for Jack Campbell in Edmonton, and Stuart Skinner, of course, who played for the Pacific Division at the All-Star game. He's had a tough time being consistent. So maybe these are the 3 games where the Jets get their goal scoring and get the goals start going up again, that confidence that way. I'm not saying it's going to be that easy because of that, because both teams make it, can score as well as the Winnipeg Jets. So it'll be a challenge, but these are not the goaltenders that the Jets have run into in the past week or so.
Gentlemen, it's a busy time, so I appreciate you all taking this time, and I appreciate the speed in which Daniel Moss will be cutting this podcast because it is the trade deadline and so many things happen all at once. And we're talking about a game coming up tomorrow, and we don't want this to be dated. Tyler, also, thank you for taking time out for making your heroic return to the pod.
Well, thanks for having me. And through this whole last segment, I've tried not to cough. I've got a frog in my throat right now.
I see you struggling.
Oh my God, my eyes are watering. It's bad.
I think the eyes are watering because you're just emotional in making your return. But
true. Yeah, that's fair.
Or his hands are still hurting from last night.
It's been fun to be back in here.
It's a comfy room. It really is.
It is.
All right. Thank you for listening to episode 154 of the Ground Control Podcast. We'll see you very soon.
This has been Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets. For more Jets news, videos, and more, head to winnipegjets.com.